quote in the book, the first page actually says, is actually a call on the conscience of the event itself, right? It says, to all events around the world, you're only as relevant as the people who participate. Their need you fulfill and the experience you bring. Challenge the norm and make yourself matter, right? So I think at the end of the day, and that's the fun part about events. I'm an event junkie, right? So I devour events because I want to understand how they work and I want to understand how they create value for people. And so the participant's perspective is usually it's the most critical, but also usually the hardest for the event owner to understand, because they are in the opposite role, I love being a participant at an event. I don't do it all that often, but because usually I'm a speaker or somehow involved in the design of the event, and being a participant from time to time is a big revelation.
Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dagger, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Ruud Janssen. He is a Switzerland-based entrepreneur that has been an innovator and game changer in the hospitality and meetings and event industry since 1994. You're showing your age there a little bit, Ruud. He is a founder of EventCanvas.org Foundation and Event Model Generation, an event design consulting and training firm aimed at creating a common language for meetings and events. Ruud, thanks for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe, for this initiative. I truly appreciate it.
Well, I guess before we get started with your new book, okay, which really is an interesting compilation, okay, but and your accompanying platform, which we'll get into later, we might need just to start with defining the word event, okay, because I think that might have a pretty wide meaning. What's an event?
Oh, don't get me started, Joe. So in our definition, an event is anything that involves at least two stakeholders, and it is something that changes behavior. Okay. Now, some people have, so when we think of events, we think of typically the events that you think about in terms of, product launches or association events or trade shows or, governmental events that take place. But many people that have used the event canvas have told us, well, it's all about behavior change. It's all about two stakeholders or at least two stakes. Could it just be something you use when looking at an interaction between a person and a machine as well? And so people have challenged the boundaries of how it can be used. I think we've designed it initially for the typical event in its definition of having groups of people together at a specific place and time and having them interact. So it could be anything from Elsa's 7th birthday all the way through to the Nuclear Security Summit or anything in between.
Well, the immediate thought of most, okay, to think of the book, the Event Design Canvas, we'll compare it to Osterwalder's business model canvas, right? I mean, where does it differ and what are the similarities, just to get past that, okay?
Great. That's interesting. I first met Alex Osterwalder in 2010 when the association I was on the board of, called Meeting Professionals International, had a board meeting just before one of its major events called the World Education Congress. And Alex came in and talked to our board about the Tower of Babylon and how businesses create value. And the business model canvas was in its early stages then and just being published in the book. And it dawned upon me that being able to articulate how a business creates value on a single piece of paper, taking away the blah blah, and having well-founded discussions around very specific cubicles of information is actually a very powerful tool. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when we'd met a couple of times, and when Alex hosted his Business Design Summit in Berlin in 2013, I had lunch with him a couple of weeks before. His promise was more learning in 2 days than the rest of your year. And I swiped my credit card and paid 2,000 euros and decided to go together with a colleague, Rolf Vissen, who was one of the co-founders and co-creators of the Event Canvas. Really hadn't published a program yet at that stage. And when I had lunch with him a couple of weeks before, I could see that deer in headlight look in his eye of the sheer terror of owning an event, right? An event owner, somebody that says, I'm going to do an event, has this drive and enthusiasm and a conviction that an event is going to deliver something in some way from people that go to that event. And at the same time, after having said you're going to do an event, then you start realizing all the different stakeholders and stakes that are involved, right? So in his case, it was the event owner himself, the speakers at the event, the participants who pay to go to the event, but also those that are the vendors in creating the event in itself, and maybe the sponsors that support it financially and have a stake in getting exposure to that specific part of the audience. And it was interesting that, at the time we said, well, we're not going to help you at this stage. Just go do the event because you guys are going to do great. It didn't help him. He was actually quite upset because the event disrupted his company, the flow of his team, because it sucked away a lot of attention from his team. And so we said, okay, carry on. And then after the event, we're happy to give you our perspective on how your event went through the lens of people that are experienced in the events industry. And that's when we tested a lot of our thinking on his team. So it was a great way to kind of exchange our expertises and prototype new versions and test our thinking on them. And they should bullet holes into our canvas at the time. And we helped each other to actually get it to the level where it is now. So his event was a call for toolsmiths. Create visual templates that you can use in your business line that will allow people to have sensible and very high-level, good strategic conversations about what innovation looks like in your field of expertise. And actually, the outcome, this book and the EventCanvas.org Foundation and Event Model Generation as a training and consulting firm are actually, catalyzed by actually seeing this other development happening, seeing how people pick that up, and actually taking the good thinking from that and applying it in a different industry. The best outcome of that event is that it's created more clarity in how events are designed, and actually is now building businesses and building services and training around people wanting to do this in this specific way.
So what's unique about the canvas? Why should I use a canvas rather than just having my little, binder over here to take care of it?
Yeah, great point. So I see creating an event, just like creating a business, but I think an event even more so. An event can be considered like a temporary business, but it's also quite a bit more. When you put together an event, it takes a little village to pull off an event, right? It's not something you do on your own. And this is why we say event design is not a solo sport, right? You need to bring in different perspectives of different people as you think through the event design. Now, when you do that, each of us brings in their prefrontal cortex, and we have this experience simulator, which allows us to kind of think forward, right? So based on your experiences, Joe, and based on my experiences or somebody else that we would pull into our event design team, we would be thinking on behalf of what does the event owner want, what does the participant want, what does the speaker want, what does the sponsor want, and they each have quite selfish ways in which that event is going to create value for them. And what we do as a result of the process of the event canvas is that we isolate each of these perspectives very specifically. We use our collective brain power to think on behalf of that person, and we tend to use empathy mapping, something developed by Explain, Dave Gray, as a way to articulate or to extract behaviors. When a team is able to identify how one group enters the event and how different their behaviors when they exit the event, if you can actually articulate that very specifically, you have the beginnings of a good event design. The problem is very often people get distracted by all sorts of things around events, don't think on behalf of a very specific stakeholder. And so the canvas allows you to go through a very systematic stepped approach of 1, designing the desired behavior change, 2, framing the design problem, and 3, then articulating what the event design actually looks like. So for us, the logic of having a chronologic sequence from entry of the event to exit of the event, having restrictions of budgets maybe, and of time that people want to spend at the event, what they expect in return of attending the event, maybe revenues that need to come out of the event, and how it gets jobs done and delivers the promise of the event. To us, that is a very important thing to have a common understanding about that prior to starting the execution and delivery of an event, which usually causes problems. If you haven't thought of the design up front and you're basically starting to build the event and try to figure out what it's all going to be about as you go along, it's going to be a messy affair. And the chances of things going sour are pretty substantial.
Well, I think it was interesting. You raised really two great questions in my mind there, okay? And I just threw out my notes, okay? Because I think I'll go too long, okay? But the first question is it's just as important setting boundaries or kind of around the event as it is exploring all these great things. Is that true?
If you don't put in restrictions up front, the restrictions you know of or that you need to know of from a specific perspective, right? So how much time do people want to spend at the event? You know, what can it actually cost, or what should it return, right, in revenue? If you don't have those variables nailed down, you could design anything, right? There's no frame around it. And when design is unframed, it's called art, right? And then it's in the eye of the beholder. So what is, you know, for people to be conscious about what stakeholders need, to isolate just the behaviors of entry behavior and exit behavior, because that's the only mechanism by which events create value. And then thinking about the boundary box, right, the frame within which you need to design. That's really the hardest work of the whole event design process. So it's actually not even about design yet. That's actually just stakeholder analysis, stakeholder alignment, and framing the problem. Once you've got that done, then you start prototyping different ways in which you could deliver that behavior change by creating multiple, what we call experience journeys and instructional designs, which is basically the programming of the event and the interactions that you program to happen during the stretch of the event. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, yes, definitely. It's not owning the event. It's trying to own the outcomes, right? And the jobs to be, you know, the job that the customer really needs done, what you're being hired for. You look at this inbound, who you're appealing to, and segment them by the jobs they're hiring you to do.
Yeah, so one of the core things to do first is to long list all those that have a stake in the event, potentially have a stake in the event, right? Because you need to have a solid understanding of who these people are. You know, let's maybe bring it back to, you know, to one of the events that we illustrate in the book, right? So there's an event that we described that's called the Federation of European Risk Management Associations, right? So imagine risk managers from large companies get together, you know, once every year or once every 2 years. Actually, it's a rhythm of once every 2 years to talk to each other as risk managers about what the risk profiles are of what their companies are going through and how that's changing. Now, each of these individuals are working more or less in isolation in each of their companies because they have a responsibility in each company, and they don't often get a chance to speak to other people in the same role in another company, right? Whether they're competitors or not doesn't really matter at this stage. Now, on the other hand, you have a group of other stakeholders, let's say the insurers, right, who are interested in mitigating risk and providing risk insurance to those companies, right? So there's a natural marketplace by supply and demand of risk and of insurance, right? Now, most of the time when these two parties sit around the table, it is to talk about the policies they need to close with each other, or it is about claims that they have. So usually there is a financial stake on the table when they sit around the table. And this event gives them a 4-day window to actually get to know each other and speak with each other and interact with each other without having the policy the negotiations on the table or without having the claims negotiations on the table, but just having shop talk about what's going on in risk management across Europe, right? So to bring it back to your point, when you're looking at, you know, let's leave behavior change on the fringes for a minute and focus on the jobs to be done. Each of these risk managers has a certain number of jobs to be done, right? They have a number of basic needs. So the risk managers come in, and every risk manager in each company has a basic need, right? They want to belong to a community of like-minded other risk managers that have the same profile, the same role in other companies. They also have maybe a social need of wanting to interact with their vendors without having a claim or a, you know, or a tender, you know, procedure going on. They may also have a functional need to know exactly what's going on in the European risk management arena so that they're best informed to go back to their companies. So each of these risk managers has a specific set of jobs to be done. Now, they could go and travel to all the other members across, you know, the 27 countries and talk to them one by one, and spend 4 months on the road to get up to speed. Or they could go to the one event where all these people are together and spend 4 days doing that much more effectively. So the event gets those jobs done. They commit 4 days of their time, full time, to spend it over there. And the promise is that they now are fully informed, have leveled with all the different vendors and seen what's going on in the industry, and are up to par on what's going on and what others think of subjects that they're dealing with as well. And it sounds very logical, but what we notice is that you need to peel that onion back, for all these stakeholders very specifically. And then when we design an event, when you select which stakeholders to design for, because sometimes events can have like 16 or 26 different stakeholders, right? And you can't design for 28 different stakes at the same time. That's just, mentally impossible. We always try to reduce it to usually, the minimum is 2, but sometimes you have 4 or 6 different stakeholders. And what you do is you look at which stakeholders have high power and high interest in this specific event. So these are the stakeholders you need to delight. Those are the ones we actually very specifically analyze through empathy mapping and determine what is their entry and what is their exit behavior. And then we design just for that one stake using the event canvas. And then we go to the second stakeholder, to the third one. And these 3 or 4 perspectives layered one on top of the other, which you then need to combine. And the combination of those restrictions creates the design frame of your event. So it's a very analytical process. It's almost very linear in the beginning. Empathizing is not, most people think it's nothing you need too much instruction for, but it is very draining on, when a team has to empathize with somebody else, it takes a lot of, effort in your brain. But once you're done with that, and once you frame the problem, we usually step away from it for a while. We go do something completely different. And then the next day you come back and you look at the frame. And meantime, you've thought about all sorts of ideas of what you could be doing with the event. We park those in idea quarantine. And then we go back to our frame and take the ideas one by one and figure out what are the prototypes of this event design that could work to change that behavior from A to B for those different stakeholders, right? And usually you come up with 3, 4, or 5 different event designs, different prototypes. And you then look at, which one is going to do this most effectively. And then what you're doing is you're basically having a strategic conversation first amongst the team themselves, and then you pull out one of those prototypes which you think is going to work best for this very next event. And usually the other prototypes you came up with, you can shelve and put in the freezer and defrost them at a later time, because there's never any bad designs. It's just the wrong time for that design to happen. And so the process is, it's a very good, let's say, team building exercise to get everybody on the same page. And very often we've developed a formula to say, before you start executing an event, spend at least 1% of the total event time thinking about the event design using this process. Example, if you have 100 people going to an 8-hour event, be 800 man hours spent at the event, you would want to spend 1% of that time. Yeah. So you want to spend 8 hours thinking deeply about the event design, analyzing the stakes of these different people with a group of people. And let's say there would be 2 of us on that team or 4 of us on that team. You could say 8 hours divided by 4. So if we both spend 2 hours thinking about the time of 800 hours of our participants' time in that event, that's what we owe to ourselves to design an event properly.
I don't think that sounds like very much, actually. When I use this canvas, it helps me document, kind of can use it to turn it into standard work for others and maybe spend time to improve events later, similar type events. This worked, this didn't work, right? I mean, it's a great tool to document things with.
Absolutely. So, Joe, I'm glad you sliced that in, because if you look at the case studies and if you look at the gallery that we built, and we've built this under Creative Commons license, so everybody can use this when using it non-commercially. So we encourage people to download it. It's now been translated into 8 languages already, so you can do this in Russian and in Mandarin Chinese. And today we're actually launching the Suomi version in Finnish. But basically, we try to use visual language. So visual thinking is very powerful when we translate the event narrative, which is the outcome of the design process, into a visual. It actually creates a compass for those that are organizing that event, or those that are looking to talk about the event, to market its promise, they actually have a visual that they can refer to. And let me just pull up an example here from the book. So, here's an example where you can see the risk managers, balancing themselves on a red thread from entry to exit behavior, others looking to catch their risk. And there's a very visual picture about the dynamic of how the value is being built at that event. And that picture allows anyone to articulate how that event created value, because they now understand the flow of the story and can interpret what it means for the risk manager, for the insurer, or for the federation that owns the event, right? So to bring it back to what you said, it's a good way to document existing events, absolutely, right? So sometimes people find it hard to think about their future event because they've got all these thoughts about their past events, right? Or maybe it's a new event, they don't have a history. But let's pretend there is a history. Let me take an example of a recent work we've done with the United Nations here in Geneva. An event that was around for 15 years, had developed, and it's almost becoming a 15-year-old teenager. I developed, we kind of drew a parallel between a person turning 15 and the event turning 15, and then wondering where the event is going in 2020, right? And so one of the exercises we did is we documented the very first past events, because everybody has a very solid knowledge about who were the stakeholders, what was their entry-exit behaviors. You usually have documents like photos or interviews or statements from people that you can use to actually validate what happened at the past event. And so it's very easy to map out a past event based, if you have the people in the room that were part of it. Then we took and we looked at, let's say, where does this event want to go in line with the organization's goals for 2020? And we thought up the 2020 version of that same event if the organization was going to be successful at delivering where it's going, right? And so you map out that future event. And actually, when we had the gap between 2015 and 2020, we could backcast. If we need to get from here to here in 5 steps, what are the increments of change that we have to do over these next 5 events to get from 2015 to 2020, right? So now all of a sudden, all the hurdles you saw when looking from 2015 to 2016, oh, this is difficult, we can't change this, we've always done it like this for 15 years, all those motivations that you usually hear event teams say, you can blow those out of the water by looking at it big picture, zooming out, I compare it to the Google Maps zooming function, you go to Google Earth, and you kind of look out, and you look at the 20-year stretch, and then you look at what does that mean, and you take out the essence of behavior change. And that's the power of simplifying things using a canvas. Now, I'm not saying the canvas is simple, because it took us about a year to come up with the one piece of paper, right? So after the session with the guys in Thun in Switzerland, and after our thinking that Roel and I have been doing, we did a couple of incubators and got people involved, our event specialists from different fields, and they shot it to pieces, and then we picked up the pieces and we reassembled and we rethought, and it took us a year to get to this one piece of paper. So yeah, simplicity is nice, but it takes some time to get there.
One of the things that appeals to me about it is that it's a nice visual display for practically, as you mentioned, any type of event. And I think of the lean world, we think of Kaizen events and value stream mapping where we have current state and future events, but we got to prepare for those meetings, okay? And it's nice to have some structure around meetings. Any project management knows that, it's the reflection at the end of the process that improves your project management, okay? Because if you just keep doing the projects the same way, the same process,
you can expect different results, right?
Right. And can I do this online? And do you offer a platform that I can use online to accomplish this?
Yeah. So one of the things that we noticed that if you can't do it on paper, you could probably not even do it online, right? So we always recommend to start off with paper and real life use of it, which is the reason why a lot of the tools that we've developed are first on paper. We very often work with a group, against the wall and in an office, and we've got walls all over the place. And what we've done is actually, we with many teams that we work with are distributed teams. The work carries on when we're not in the same room. So how do you take those assets and bring them online and then collaborate? And this is where we've developed templates that are usable on a platform that we collaborate with called Mural. with them, we've actually, designed a number of templates that you can use as a team. And just the way, you, Joe, are based in the US and I'm based in Switzerland, we could actually sit here and share our screen and see each other working with Post-its and links and videos and drops into that, and have a focused conversation using, a video conferencing system like this, where you can use all sorts of collaborative techniques to put the designs online, to evolve them over time, and to replicate them when you're doing future events, same versions of the same of a future event. And let me give you an example. So most indicative projects of this is a project we did for the Internet Society, which is a community that was started by Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn to look after the internet, make sure it keeps functioning. And these people are celebrating their 25th anniversary next year. And 3 years ago, they got a new CEO, and she said, well, this organization doesn't have its own event, yet we meet at all these events that others are hosting, and we run into our communities. So I want to bring these societies together from different countries that are part of our community and host an event for the internet on the internet. And when we designed that event from scratch, we had about 6 months with a team of 9. She encouraged everybody in the organization to become part of the design process, which to us was like, oh my God, 90 people involved in the event design. That's a lot of people, right? And it was fun. When we did the stakeholder analysis, which usually takes quite a bit of time, we were working in parallel, we had 7 or 8 people in Geneva, 7 or 8 people in Reston in Virginia. We had people in Uruguay and in Singapore who were all working in parallel using the same methodology, reporting back out in little video snippets, which were then parked back on that platform. And we could look at each other's outcomes of the stakeholder analysis prior to assembling the event design. So the prototyping and the designing was happening in real life in 5 places at the same time. The outputs were aggregated online. The designs were put there. And over a period of, I think probably 2.5 months, we went from initial idea to the prototype that we wanted to execute. And people had time to input and reflect and look at it in their own time zone. And, that to me is kind of the future of collaboration, of blending live design with online design, providing you have clarity about the process and how you're doing things. What ultimately comes out is the product of the great minds of people that are involved in it, right? All we do is frame a process around it that allows you to be successful at designing it.
I have to ask you before I leave you, is it, you have worked in event management for years, okay, for a long, long time. And there seems to be so many of them now. I mean, everybody's holding an event over here, an event over here. And what really separates the good ones? What's that uniqueness that jumps out to you when you say, this guy's got it?
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. And sometimes it's the very small things that make a big difference, right? So, touching people emotionally, because that's what they remember. People remember how you made them feel. So it's very important to orchestrate experience journeys and instructional designs that trigger into somebody's natural kind of sequence, right, or somebody's natural frequency. I think the sheer experience of traveling very often already puts somebody in a very different mindset or in a different mode. To be in the moment and to make change happen, so if you need to change behavior, it can only happen in the moment, right? You can't do that in the past. You don't know if you may be able to do it in the future. But most people run on this autopilot, which doesn't allow you to make any changes, right? So switching off the autopilot, which is what good events do, right? It's switching off what I normally do. It forces me to disconnect from the outside world and bring me into a new world where I'm temporarily in a new reality. Those are the events, it's almost like a good movie. Like when at the end the lights go on and you go, and you're in the movie, and you feel like, oh my God, you've experienced something and you actually forgot that you were in a movie theater. Some events can have that impact as well. So, but for me, a great event are the ones that are life-changing, the ones that change your course, your direction. The ones that create a big change in your life, right? And these could be social events, these could be private events, these could be business events. But everybody remembers those milestones. And when you think back of those events and what the ingredients were, why it was magical, or why something happened, why people were getting into a specific flow, to me, everybody has that talent of observing when it happens. But it doesn't always happen for everybody at the same time at the same event, right? And that's what makes events so exciting for me is is that I'm almost like an anthropologist looking at these events through that lens. And I really liked Jim Gilmore's book on that. Like, looking at it in different ways is really important. And we actually, when we research events, when we document events, we involve people in our conspiracy, right? So we involve a set of speakers, we involve the event owner, we involve a set of participants, a set of sponsors to help us look through their lens and to document their journeys and to document what things they learn and what behaviors they change. Because those pieces of evidence give you all you need to know to decode the events, right? And then you can create the blueprints and then you can articulate them. And this is actually exactly what the more sophisticated event organizers, so we're doing quite a bit of work now with the International Olympic Committee, because they're very motivated to find ways of serving the different stakes and finding ways of designing for that to happen in a very specific way so that you create a consistency of quality over time, right? Everybody wants to make their Olympics the very best Olympics in the world, right? But how do you create a consistent line across that? It's by having blueprints of what the mechanisms are by which the events happen. Some of the things are very predictable. Other things are open for interpretation. And this is where the EventCanvas helps to, pull that apart and detail all those different moments.
If I'm writing a check, okay, sending these people to the events, this isn't a bad platform to evaluate an event by, is it?
Well, if I were some organizations that have picked this up internally have now said, this is our de facto method. If we don't understand what behavior we're changing with this event, if I don't understand the promise and I cannot articulate how that promise will be delivered and what jobs will get done and what the cost is and the expected revenue on the other end of it and the time commitment involved, then I can't take an executive decision on whether this is going to happen or not, right? So once you've seen this, you can't unsee it. That's the hard part about it. And some people that are using it are saying, how did people organize events before this thing existed? Well, by sheer serendipity and luck, some events have been fantastic because, the gut instinct of a team can be fantastic. But if I were in charge of the event, like you're mentioning as an event owner, I would like some form of predictability or accountability for those that are picking up the ball on what is this event going to deliver, right?
Yes.
And because what you're saying, there's tons of events and more are coming. But events are probably the riskiest marketing tools in the toolbox. They're the most expensive ones. We know that much. They also change behavior most, right? They're the best activators that you can imagine, but they also have the highest risk profile. So and it was funny to go back to that risk management association or federation. When we held the EventCanvas up in front of them and they were looking at the analysis of the past event, they looked at it in a different way. They actually said, all the lines, as soon as you cross a line, that's a risk pattern that you need to identify. And we'd never looked at it like that. So they said, every line that's in this thing, when you cross one, that's a potential risk. So we need to see how far we can stretch it left and right to determine the risk associated with that, with that part of the event design. So we were we were flabbergasted, and it's true. If you look at it like that through their lens, they're absolutely right. So it's also a risk mitigation tool if you'd like to look at it like that.
Well, I look at it just how it can proliferate, because I've done that with the business model canvas where we've sent it from, at the beginning and broken it down into departments or either into value streams, as we might call them in Lean. I can see this as an event thing, not only attending an event, but as I come back from an event, how are we going to proliferate that knowledge through the organization and having many events along the way? Because not every event model canvas has to be this full-blown thing, right? It can be just the obvious Post-it note in each place if you want it to be.
Exactly. Or you could just fill in two parts of saying, here's two things we need to focus on for this upcoming event. To be geeky about this, Joe, I fully agree. I mean, we use the event canvas and the business model canvas and different types of canvases. We created one that's called the stakeholder alignment canvas that has become useful when you have a lot of stakeholders. But in essence, whenever you take those things, it's about speaking that common language, and that's when the words of Alex resonate in my head, about the blah, 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 how do you have a good conversation and have a common language, which is usually the thing that's missing when you're feeling that you're not having a good conversation, right? And good conversation are based around a common vocabulary or common language. Visuals tend to help a lot in explaining that. But just a sheer understanding of, so the innovation is happening in that cubicle, right? Or this is where we're making the change. Or if we change this, what happens there, right? And those mechanisms, those building block mechanisms in your mind, those levers that you have between those building blocks, that's what makes the conversation so sensible with those that understand that way of looking at it. And the most encouraging thing that we've seen there is that most CEOs or business owners or event owners that we talk with at a high level usually have an understanding of the business model canvas, or have come across this thinking before. And when they see the team at work, they're really confident. Oh, you're really doing your homework. I get that. And they walk directly to where the output is, the prototypes. And it's almost as if they just understand what's there without explanation. And to me, that is like, that's what I'm in awe of, those people that, in a massive information can look at a structure and understand its dynamic because it's visually well laid out, or because it makes sense in their head, or because the order and sequence is logical. And I think this is where, we're making strides in saving people tons of time and headaches to have these conversations up front with the event owners and the strategic owners of the initiatives, instead of having it a half hour before the event starts, right? Because that can be a lot more painful, and people are not their normal selves when you amp up to the last minutes before they go on stage, right? Or so you've got to play with that. When is a team in open mode to think design, right? And when is it in closed mode to land the A380, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to be designing the event's door or the airplane's door when you're landing the plane. And there's only two ways to land it, right?
Well, and I always say that is when you standardize a process, you standardize a form, okay, something like this, or standardize a canvas on the way we do things. People stop trying to figure out the process, trying to figure out the canvas, okay, and they start looking at what's in it.
Yes, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
The canvas is not what it's about. It's about getting the team on the same page. That's the purpose. Yeah. And it was funny, before we wrote the book, people that we trained and worked with said, well, how do we replicate this process? Because we do it by heart. We don't have to think about it because we created it. And so, in working with our story engagement engineer, Dennis Lyer, and people that have helped us to bottle up the process, we've created what we call the event simulator facilitation kit, which is it's almost like a box that you bring into the event design meeting. And you put it on the table, and there's roll cards, and there's a deck of 45 steps, 45 things that you go through. And you put event wallpaper on the wall. So you've got all the motives to create your event design war room, right? Mm-hmm. And then people go into that mode of, okay, so I've got a role. So I'm the timekeeper, and you're the jester, and you're the facilitator, Joe, and this person is the recorder, and this person is going to be the blah, blah reducer. And we all have a role, and we go out of our normal roles, and now we're going to design an event, right? Let's pretend we are now the speaker. Okay, what does the speaker see? What do they hear, think, and feel? What's their behavior? What's their pain and gain? What jobs are they trying to get done, right? How do they look after the event, right? Fast forward, then you go back, and then you think about, what's the promise of the event in a tweet, right? How much time are they willing to spend? What are they willing to spend out of pocket? What do they expect in return? What are their expectations, satisfaction? So you go through all the different things very systematically, but under time pressure. Right. So any stakeholders analysis doesn't take longer than 60 minutes. So it's not that it's a lengthy process, but it's brain exercise. You need to use your brain, or the team's brain. You stretch it quite a bit. Yeah.
I'm on a mission to get away from war rooms, get into fun rooms. Okay, so
yeah. I don't like the word war room, but we call it an event design room. And usually we confiscate an empty office space in the building where these teams are. We say, oh, this office is going to be temporarily confiscated to be the event design room. And people want to go to that room because it's a fun room to be. Right, that's where they play around with the event design.
Sure. So, I could go on and on. Love the material. Okay, enjoy it tremendously. Tell someone where they can go to learn more, connect up with you, find the book.
Excellent. So It's very simple. EventCanvas.org is where you will find everything. There's a gallery of event designs as examples. You'll see the book there that you can download the first 100 pages for free. And you can also order the book if you like those first 100 pages. The book comes with a whole batch of online resources that you can use as well with your team, that you can print out, different posters and additional materials, diagnostic tools. We deliver training, so you'll find that on the site as well. There's a certificate in event design program we do as an in-company or at universities like the University of Amsterdam or San Diego State University. We speak and engage with teams in both open trainings and in company things across the world. So you'll see a listing there of where we're hanging out. And if we're in your neck of the woods, give us a shout. Or if we're not, then bring us over or reach out to us online. It's either Rolf Visse, Dennis Luijer, or myself, Ruud Janssen. Reach any of the three of us. We're a very small, agile group of people.
This podcast will be available in the Business Design 101 iTunes Store and the Business Design 101 blog site, and I encourage you to take a look at the EventCanvas. Okay, thank you very much, Ruud.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.